I've had some controversial rankings before, but this might be the one that stirs up the most debate. And why is that? Because I'm not just ranking individual Nintendo games, I'm ranking entire series. And depending on your taste, your list is probably going to look a lot different than mine. If you want to skip straight to the rankings, this timestamp is on screen. Now if you're still here and didn't skip to the timestamp, I'm going to explain what I'm going to be doing for this ranking. So Nintendo's library is massive. Even diehard fans might not know every Nintendo franchise. Like, have you ever heard of Kerwin? Exactly. To keep things fair, here are the rules. The series has to be first or second party Nintendo. It needs at least 3 distinct entries, keyword distinct, and it has to be released in North America. From there, I'll judge these franchises on a few things: their popularity, relevancy, and influence, their critical reception, their overall libraries, and my own personal opinions. It doesn't mean I will rank these franchises by my personal favorite to least favorite, but it will be a big factor when determining the order, since I do want to make this list distinctively mine. Another thing is, sub-series will be grouped with their main franchise, so yes, Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land gets folded into Zelda. The one exception though is Mario Kart, because it's just too big to lump in with the main Mario series and even the other Mario sports games and RPGs. Of course your list will be different, and that's the fun of it. There's endless ways to rank Nintendo's franchises, and this is just mine. None of these franchises are even bad overall, but some just aren't as significant or simply just don't compare to others. I am going to explain my reasoning for each franchise's placement as well, just to give some more understanding of why it is where it is. So with that out of the way, let's get into the lowest franchise on this list, which I'm going to explain more briefly before we start to get into the big names where I'm going to go more in depth. Starting off with the franchises I just want to group together due to them just not being notable enough, or just not really having distinct entries. We have Endless Ocean, Famicom Detective Club, Style Savvy, Art Academy, and Excitebike. I have almost no experience with any of these series, and outside of Excitebike, there's a good chance you haven't even heard of these. And the reason I have Excitebike outside the number of rankings on this list is just because the games really aren't distinct, but I still did want to give it a mention. Number 34, Game & Watch. We're starting way back at the roots of Nintendo's gaming history with the Game & Watch series. Running from 1980 through the early 90s, these pocket-sized devices weren't much more than single-screen toys, but they were revolutionary at the time. They introduced the D-pad that proved handheld gaming could be a real market, and they gave Nintendo a foundation to build on. While you probably wouldn't fire up Ball or Fire, or maybe you would, the series' legacy is undeniable. It's less about how fun the games are in 2025 and more about how much they mattered. Without Game & Watch, handheld gaming and maybe even Nintendo's success wouldn't look the same, but even with that legacy, it's just hard to rank this any higher because of how primitive these games are and just how simple they are. Number 33, Fossil Fighters. A quirky DS-era series where you dug up fossils, revived them into dinosaurs called Vivosaurs, and battled them Pokemon style. I got 2 sequels on DS and 3DS and built a small cult following, but just never found mainstream success. Reviews were mixed, sales were low, and Nintendo quietly shelved it. It's a fun concept that showed Nintendo's willingness to experiment, but these games just don't have much of legacy, and in my opinion, they're all just kind of mid at best. I think there might be more to do here in these games than some franchises higher up on the list, but I think there's just less appeal with this series. Number 32, Brain Age / Big Brain Academy. The DS-era sensation that somehow got teachers, parents, and grandparents on board with gaming. Brain Age wasn't flashy, it was math problems, memory puzzles, and Dr. Kawashima's floating head telling you your brain age. It turned a handheld console into something that felt productive, and it helped Nintendo sell the DS to people who had never bought a video game before. Its cousin, Big Brain Academy, leaned a little more into fun with family-friendly challenges and multiplayer. Together, these games expanded Nintendo's audience in a massive way. They may not hold up as timeless experiences you revisit for decades, but for what they did in the moment, turning Nintendo into a household brand across every age group, it's still notable enough to be on this list. These games sold surprisingly well, but like with Game & Watch, it's hard to put the series higher since it's not even a traditional games franchise. Number 31, Rhythm Heaven. Nintendo has plenty of rhythm in its soul, but only one series turned that into its own identity, Rhythm Heaven. Quirky, challenging, and endlessly creative, the series asks you to tap, flick, and clap in time with some of the weirdest scenarios ever put in a video game, like helping a samurai slice demons to music, or playing badminton on an airplane. It built a cult following with the DS and Wii entries in particular, and while it never became mainstream in the way Mario or Zelda could, those who love it really love it. I personally never got into the series, but I definitely do see the appeal. Number 30, BoxBoy. Sometimes Nintendo's brilliance comes in the simplest packages, literally. BoxBoy from HAL Laboratory puts you in control of a little cube named Cubie, who solves puzzles by creating more boxes. Sounds basic, but the design is sharp, inventive, and quietly addictive. Across multiple games on the 3DS and Switch, BoxBoy built up a reputation as one of Nintendo's smartest modern puzzle series. It was never meant to be a headliner, but it showed how even in the 2010s, Nintendo was still delivering fresh ideas on a small scale. It's one of those hidden gems that hardcore fans bring up when they want to prove how deep Nintendo's library goes. Unfortunately, the first 3 games in the series are no longer available to buy since the 3DS eShop shut down, and that's honestly really sad because these were really fun. I also cover the series in another video if you want to check it out. And as for why this isn't higher, even though these games are very high quality, they are fairly simple games, and I just don't know what other series I could put it above. Number 29, Chibi-Robo. Nintendo's tiniest cult hero, or you know what, how big is Olimar? The GameCube original was a charming and surprisingly emotional adventure about a household helper robot fixing problems, cleaning up, and spreading joy. It built a small but dedicated fan base, but the series never really found its footing after that. Later entries veered off course, and by the time Ziplash hit the 3DS, fans were practically begging Nintendo to give Chibi-Robo the love he deserved. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened. Still, the original game is remembered fondly for its creativity and heart, and Chibi-Robo remains one of Nintendo's biggest what could have been franchises. At least now people can experience the GameCube original on the Switch 2 online. But Nintendo, give us a new game in the series that isn't just Ziplash 2. Number 28, Wave Race. Nintendo's jet ski racer that peaked during the N64 era. The series actually started on the Game Boy, but it was Wave Race 64 that made it a fan favorite thanks to its then groundbreaking water physics and tight controls. A follow-up on the GameCube, Blue Storm, kept the formula going, but since then the series has been completely dormant. Wave Race is fondly remembered as one of Nintendo's best tech showcase franchises, but with only 3 entries and no signs of a comeback, it feels more like a snapshot of its era than a lasting series, which keeps it down here in the rankings. Number 27, Pilotwings. If you followed Nintendo for a while, you'll notice that Pilotwings tends to show up when Nintendo launches new hardware, at least it used to. The SNES original showed off Mode 7 graphics, the N64 version demonstrated early 3D flight, and Pilotwings Resort did the same thing for the 3DS's stereoscopic visuals. The games themselves are lighthearted flight sims where you skydive, pilot planes, and even fly rocket belts. They've never been system sellers, but they've always been fun little showcases of Nintendo's technology at the time. Pilotwings is the kind of series that might not blow anyone away, but it's just a relaxing game to play. I actually want to see a new one on Switch too since it's been a while. It was just something about exploring Woohoo Island on the 3DS that just made it a really fun adventure. Number 26, Nintendogs. Few games define the DS boom like Nintendogs. It was a truly unique pet simulator that eventually even got its own Smash stage. The idea of using a touchscreen to feed, train, and play with a virtual puppy sounded silly until you tried it, and then suddenly everyone was hooked. It sold a crazy 20 million plus copies and introduced millions of casual players to Nintendo. The series continued with Nintendogs plus Cats on 3DS, but since then it's gone quiet. Still, its impact was massive, and it showed Nintendo's ability to create emotional connections out of simple concepts. And for a while, it made gamers out of people who didn't even know they wanted to be. And now that I talk about Nintendogs like this, it reminds me a lot of Brain Age. There was just something special about the DS era. Number 25, Advance Wars. This turn-based tactical series took the complexity of strategy games and wrapped it in bright, approachable visuals. It was easy to learn, but it had the kind of depth that kept players hooked for hours. The series thrived on the GBA and DS before going dormant for over a decade, but fans never stopped asking for it back. That persistence paid off when Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp finally hit the Switch. Even if it was just a remake, it reminded everyone why Advance Wars was so beloved in the first place. This is another series I personally just haven't played, so I'm ranking it here based on other factors. I do want to give the Switch version a try though, so let me know in the comments if you think it's worth it. Number 24, Golden Sun. Another GBA RPG series, Golden Sun pushed its hardware to the limit, with lush visuals, a sweeping fantasy story, and a unique battle system that used elemental powers called Dijin. I'm probably mispronouncing that, and I know people are probably going to let me know in the comments, but the first 2 games in particular are still praised as one of the best handheld RPGs ever made. Unfortunately, the series fizzled out after the DS entry, and it hasn't returned since. Golden Sun is one of those series where the people who played it will never stop talking about how much they want a revival, and for good reason. It's one of Nintendo's most ambitious forgotten gems. Number 23, Pushmo. Another game I covered in another video. 3DS was full of great little eShop experiments, and Pushmo was one of the best. Starring the adorable Mallow, Pushmo had you pulling and pushing blocks to climb elaborate puzzle towers. It was deceptively deep and offered endless challenges, especially with user-created levels. It got a couple follow-ups, Crashmo, Pushmo World on the Wii U, and Stretchmo, but like a lot of digital-only series, it faded into the background. Still, it stands as one of Nintendo's best original puzzle ideas of the modern era, and it's a shame it hasn't had a proper revival on the Switch. The series is in the same category as BoxBoy, but I just think the series is a lot more fleshed out and just more fun. Number 22, Kid Icarus. This is the last franchise I want to just talk about briefly before I start going into more in-depth explanations. Kid Icarus is an interesting IP. It's a series that somehow spans both the NES launch era and the 3DS modern handheld era, with almost nothing in between. The original was a quirky platformer that built a cult following, and its Game Boy sequel kept the flame alive. Then decades later, Kid Icarus Uprising brought Pit and Palutena back with a bang. The game was full of personality, humor, and ambitious ideas, though its controls left some players frustrated frustrated. Uprising is the sole reason Kid Icarus is as high as it is on this list. As I've said, there really isn't much else. Since then, the series has gone quiet again, but between Uprising and Pit being in Smash, and I'm a Pit main myself, comment if you are too, Kid Icarus has a bigger legacy now than it ever did in the 80s, and it's a shame that we haven't gotten any more games since Uprising, because that was a really solid game with a lot of potential. And number 21, Punch-Out. Kicking things off for the second part of this video, Punch-Out is one of Nintendo's oldest and most recognizable series. First hitting arcades in '84, Punch-Out put players in the shoes of Little Mac, the underdog boxer taking on a colorful roster of opponents. The NES version that followed is where the franchise cemented itself in gaming history, especially with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, which turned what could have been a simple sports game into an iconic cultural moment. Players still remember the thrill of dodging, weaving, and landing that knockout punch against Mike Tyson himself 40 years before Jake Paul did, as well as characters like Bald Bull and King Hippo and just so many more wacky characters. The formula is deceptively simple but endlessly addictive. It's not about button mashing, it's about memorizing patterns, reacting with perfect timing, and pulling off that final blow. In an era where sports games were still finding their identity, Punch-Out stood out as something that felt more like a puzzle box fighter than a traditional boxing sim. It was Nintendo's genius design philosophy on full display, easy to learn but tough to master. Like, this game is surprisingly difficult, but here's the reason it sits at 21 and not higher. While the games are beloved, the series hasn't had the depth or consistency to keep pace with Nintendo's giants. After a long hiatus, Punch-Out for Wii in 2009 revitalized the franchise with updated graphics and faithful gameplay, and also a really fun Wii balance board mode. But since then, just silence. Like, literally nothing except Little Mac becoming a fighter in Smash. Compared to series that have grown, innovated, and produced decades of content, Punch-Out feels stuck in time. It's still iconic, but its limited scope keeps it lower on the list. I'm just shocked we haven't gotten a new one on Switch, because you literally have the two Joy-Cons with you at all times. Like, imagine how fun it would be to use those. Like, we had the same thing on the Wii where you'd use both Wii remotes, but it would be even more accessible now. And now another abandoned series, number 20, F-Zero. Nintendo's first futuristic racer that debuted alongside the SNES. Designed as a showcase for the system's Mode 7 graphics, F-Zero was fast, flashy, and unlike anything else on the market at the time, it proved Nintendo could do more than platformers or adventure games. They could make a pure adrenaline experience built around speed and precision. The series hit its peak with F-Zero GX on the GameCube, which is still widely regarded as one of the greatest racing games ever made to many people, thanks to its blistering pace, steep mechanics, and demanding difficulty curve. The appeal of F-Zero lies in its intensity. These aren't cozy Mario Kart races with banana peels and shells. This is some serious racing for grown-ups. It built a loyal fan base that still celebrates Captain Falcon and his legendary Falcon Punch, which ironically became more famous through Smash Bros. Than F-Zero itself. So why isn't it higher? Because Nintendo just completely abandoned it. After GX in 2003 and a few small spin-offs, the series went completely dormant. For 20 years, fans have begged for a new entry, but aside from the appearance from Captain Falcon in Smash or a stage in Mario Kart, Nintendo has not made any brand new games. F-Zero's legacy is incredible, but its absence makes it feel more like a memory than a living, thriving franchise, and that leaves it at 20, where it's respected and beloved, but just missing in action. Number 19, Star Fox. One of Nintendo's most ambitious and inconsistent franchises, and also one you may be upset with being this low, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Debuting on the SNES in 1993, the original Star Fox wowed players with its polygonal 3D graphics. Extremely crude by today's standards, but groundbreaking at the time. It showed Nintendo's willingness to push technology, and it introduced us to Fox McCloud and his team of intergalactic pilots. Star Fox 64 in 97 built on that foundation, and still considered the high point of the franchise, and by many is an all-time great game with cinematic dogfights, memorable voice acting, and missions that beg to be replayed. Star Fox is at its best when it leans into that silly, over-the-top feel, fast-paced, branching missions, colorful characters like Falco and Slippy, and epic showdowns against Andross. Unfortunately, the series has struggled to recapture that magic. Star Fox Adventures was a divisive attempt to turn the series into a Zelda-style adventure. Star Fox Command on the DS had interesting ideas but lost focus, and Star Fox Zero on Wii U left many fans frustrated with awkward motion controls. The inconsistency is what lands Star Fox here at 19, along with the fact that I just really don't have much experience with the series and can never get into it. I was actually pretty hyped for Zero back in 2015 as I got it on launch day, but it was just kind of meh to me. Like, as I said, it was just a very disappointing game, and it's not like it's critically loved either. Like, it's widely considered one of the most disappointing Nintendo games of all time, and I actually went over this in another video. The franchise has incredible highs, but it's just as well known for its disappointments. Fans still love the characters and the concept, and Do a Barrel Roll remains one of gaming's most famous memes, but Star Fox hasn't had a true defined defining hint since the N64 almost 30 years ago. Until Nintendo figures out what to do with it, Star Fox will stay in this middling spot. It's a legendary name, but just not the best legacy. Number 18, Earthbound / Mother. Another one that is going to be very controversial. At number 18, we have Earthbound, or Mother as it's known in Japan. Few Nintendo series inspire as much love and heartbreak as this one. On the surface, Earthbound looks like a quirky RPG, kids with baseball bats fighting aliens and hippies in a cartoonish world, but spend a little time with it and you'll realize it's something far deeper. The writing is witty and self-aware, the characters feel human, and the story sneaks up on you with genuinely emotional gut punches. For many fans, Mother 3 is one of the greatest games Nintendo has ever made. The problem is, it just never left Japan officially, which is strange because Nintendo themselves has made jokes about this.
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3!
How about this instead?
Earthbound's charm lies in its personality. It takes the RPG formula and filters it through suburbia, turning everyday objects and situations into enemies and adventures. It influenced countless indie developers, most famously Toby Fox with Undertale and later Deltarune, and its fanbase remains one of the most passionate in gaming. But here's the catch. The series is tiny and only 3 main games exist, and the last one came out nearly 2 decades ago and, as I said, is a Japanese exclusive. That's why it lands at 18. Earthbound is beloved, influential, and unforgettable, but it's also painfully neglected. With such a small library and it being rather niche, it just can't compete with the depth and consistency of Nintendo's bigger series. It's a cult classic in the truest sense, treasured by those who know it, but far from a mainstream giant. If we're going based on peaks, the series could actually be a lot higher, but for me personally, I just can't put it any higher. Coming in at number 17 is the Wii Series, which isn't just a group of games, but a cultural phenomenon. Wii Sports was bundled with the Wii and instantly became a household staple. Everything from kids to grandparents were swinging their arms in living rooms, bowling strikes, and breaking TVs. The simplicity of motion controls, paired with the universal appeal of sports, made it one of the most influential games of all time. And the Wii Series didn't stop there. Wii Fit turned balance boards into living room gyms, Wii Play gave us minigame collections, Wii Sports Resort expanded the formula with activities like basketball and ping pong, and then there's Wii Music. Okay, you know what, maybe we should forget about Wii Music. At its peak, the Wii Series was one of Nintendo's top-selling brands, helping the Wii sell over 100 million units and bringing video games to an audience that never had touched a controller before. So why isn't it higher? Because while it was massive in the moment, the depth just isn't there. Wii Sports is timeless fun, but beyond that, many of these games felt more like tech demos than fully fleshed out experiences. They were perfect introductions, but not long-term staples for a bigger series. The Wii Series deserves credit for its impact and for its fun, but compared to Nintendo's deeper, more enduring franchises, it sits comfortably in the middle of this list. Number 16, Wario Land and WarioWare. At number 16, we've got the greedy, garlic-munching anti-hero himself, Wario. Wario spun off from Mario in the 90s and quickly carved out his own identity. The Wario Land series on Game Boy and beyond gave us creative, offbeat platformers that played with mechanics in ways Mario never did. Instead of running and jumping to the goal, Wario smashed through walls, collected treasures, and tanked hits like a bulldozer. It was weird, funny, and refreshing. He had a 3D platformer on the GameCube, and then a really fun hand-drawn Wii game, which is how I got introduced to the Wario series. But since then, nothing from the platformer side of Wario. Then came WarioWare, and things got even stranger. Microgames that last only a few seconds, strung together in rapid-fire fashion. It was bizarre, chaotic, and absolutely brilliant. WarioWare became one of Nintendo's most consistently creative outlets, spawning countless minigames and influencing party games across the industry. Now, these arguably could have had their own distinct spots on this list since they are extremely different. Like Wario Land and WarioWare have almost nothing to do with each other, but that would mean I would have to do the same for a lot of other franchises on here, and I just don't know if the Wario series is really big enough to justify that. But why is Wario at 16? Because as fun and inventive as the series are, they've never had the same staying power or mainstream impact of the top franchises. Wario games are great in bursts, but they don't define consoles or drive sales the way Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon, or even some smaller series do. And while I like these games, really besides Wario Land Shake It, I'm just not the biggest fan of the series, and I definitely enjoy the next 15 more. Number 15, Luigi's Mansion. Green Mario no more, Luigi's Mansion has built a strong identity all on its own. The original on GameCube was a big risk for Nintendo, launching a new console with a spooky and experimental title instead of a Mario game, but it worked. Luigi's ghost hunting adventure was charming, atmospheric, and gave him a starring role at last. Well, I guess he did get a starring role before, but we're not going to talk about that game. The series went dormant for a while until we got Dark Moon on 3DS, and then exploded with Luigi's Mansion 3 on Switch, which became a massive success both critically and commercially. The games strike a perfect balance between puzzle solving, exploration, and lighthearted scares. Luigi himself brings a different kind of humor and relatability than his brother. He is nervous, clumsy, and always in over his head, but he gets the job done. The franchise has been remarkably consistent in quality, quality, with Luigi's Mansion 3 standing tall as one of the best games on Switch. I know a lot of people don't like Dark Moon, also known as Luigi's Mansion 2, but I still found it to be an enjoyable game. So why number 15? Because while Luigi's Mansion is fantastic, it's still a smaller series with only 3 main entries and a couple of remasters. Doesn't have the volume or the history of the titans above it, but make no mistake, Luigi has proven he can carry a franchise, and this ranking reflects both the quality of his games and their limited scope. And I know there's only 3 main games, just like with Earthbound. I personally just like the Luigi's Mansion games better. And obviously the Luigi's Mansion series is a lot more popular, and it's still going strong because we did just get the Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon /2 remaster pretty recently. Number 14, Xenoblade Chronicles. So I actually worked on a similar video to this around 5 years ago, and Xenoblade at the time was lower, but since then it's gotten a ton of new content. DLCs, a brand new game, 2 remasters. Few modern series have risen as fast as Xenoblade Chronicles. Originally released on Wii in 2010, it almost didn't even make it to North America until fans campaigned through Operation Rainfall. Since then, the series has exploded with multiple sequels and definitive editions, making it a flagship RPG for Nintendo. Known for its sprawling open worlds, deep combat systems, and emotional storytelling, Xenoblade has proven that Nintendo can do massive, ambitious RPGs on par with anyone else. Xenoblade's strength lies in its scope and storytelling. Each game feels like a full-blown epic, complete with complex characters and beautiful vistas. It's also been one of the best showcases for the Switch's hardware, pushing it to its limit with massive landscapes and dynamic combat. It kinda started as a niche series with the original and X on the Wii U, but its popularity has exploded on Switch, and each game has been critically acclaimed. So why is it only at 14? Because while it's critically beloved and has a loyal fan base, it's still relatively young compared to Nintendo's longest running franchises, and its complexity can be a barrier to new players. Also, I just haven't played 3 yet. I got introduced to the series with X on the Wii U and even got the strategy guide for it, and I really loved it. My biggest issue with the new games is kind of a petty one. I just don't like the super anime-y art style. I prefer the style of the first 2 games, but that's also not why the series is any higher. I just had more fun with the upcoming series, or think they just have better legacies. Number 13, Splatoon. In just around a decade, Splatoon has gone from, wait, Nintendo's making a shooter, to one of the company's biggest modern successes. The Wii U original in 2015 introduced players to a vibrant world of Inklings, turf wars, ink-based combat, and it was equal parts chaotic and strategic. It was Nintendo doing online multiplayer right, finally. Splatoon 2 on Switch expanded the fan base massively, and Splatoon 3 proved the series wasn't just a fad, but it was here to stay. The genius of Splatoon is how it takes a genre defined by violence and makes it uniquely Nintendo. There's no blood or gore, no actual weapons, you're painting the map, splattering ink, and turning every match into controlled chaos. It's just a very stylistic, fun game, and has one of the best soundtracks in modern Nintendo games, with some often misheard lyrics, because it is complete gibberish, but it's kind of funny. The community is still thriving, and the competitive scene is growing, and the series just keeps getting better depending on who you ask. We're even getting a new story game next year to flesh out some of the lore, and I'm actually really looking forward to that, because while I do obviously prefer the multiplayer compared to the story campaigns we've gotten, I actually have had fun with the single player modes before. But why is Splatoon only at 13 instead of being higher? Because it is still a young series, there's 3 games in less than 10 years, and that is impressive for what these games are doing and how they're meant to last for at least a few years each. But compared to decades of history from franchises like Zelda, Mario, or Pokemon, it just doesn't have the same weight yet. It's a rising star, and I think in another decade it can climb much higher. Now, personally, I really do love the Splatoon games. I'm not gonna act like I'm its biggest fan, but it's done a lot for Nintendo's online multiplayer. Like, this is one of the first games that was basically online only, or basically multiplayer only. I know there is a single player mode in each game, but if you're buying Splatoon, except for Splatoon Raiders, you're buying it for the multiplayer. But for now, Splatoon sits comfortably in around the top third of the list. Number 12, Yoshi. Yoshi may have debuted as Mario's trusty sidekick, but over time he's built a franchise that's all his own. The highlight is still Yoshi's Island on the SNES, or the GBA version, which is how I first experienced it. It's a masterpiece of platforming with a unique art style and mechanics that push the genre forward. There were a couple old puzzle games like Yoshi's Cookie too, but since then the Yoshi series has continued with titles like Yoshi's Story, Woolly World, Crafted World, Yoshi's Island DS, with each leaning into charming visuals and approachable gameplay. Now, there have been others that weren't great, like Yoshi's New Island, which I actually talked about in my recent most disappointing Nintendo games video. Then there's also Yoshi Touch and Go, which just has a really weird name. But the strength of the Yoshi games is their creativity and accessibility. They're colorful, whimsical, and often double as entry-level platformers for younger audiences. For veterans, sometimes the games can feel a little too simple, and the series has had its ups and downs, but when it hits big, but when it misses, it feels more like a side project than a flagship game. We are getting a new Yoshi game next year that looks really interesting, so if that lives up to the hype, I could definitely see Yoshi moving up on the list. But for now, it's going to sit at number 12. The series is really important, it's beloved, and has delivered some great games, but the inconsistency and lighter design philosophy keep Yoshi from cracking the top 10. Still, with one of the greatest Nintendo games ever made in his library, and a lot of great titles over 20 plus years, that's why I have Yoshi this high up. There's just something about the charm of the series, and I don't think it's high as something like Xenoblade Chronicles, except for the original Yoshi's Island. Like, I could completely understand having that higher, I can understand having Splatoon higher, so I'm sure there's going to be comments about that. I could definitely see both those games overtaking Yoshi soon, especially if the next Yoshi game isn't great, but it's hard to just ignore Yoshi's legacy. Number 11, Fire Emblem. Rounding out the franchises before the top 10 is Fire Emblem, a franchise that's gone from near death to international stardom. Originally a Japan-only tactical RPG, Fire Emblem was known in the West mainly because of Smash Bros. Characters like Marth and Roy are really what popularized the series, or at least got people interested in what it was. But anyway, the series being niche and mostly only popular in Japan changed with Fire Emblem Awakening on 3DS. It single-handedly saved the series by reinventing it for a modern audience and also got me into the series. I got this at the Nintendo store maybe like 10 years ago and got hooked on it. Since then, Fire Emblem has thrived with Fates, Echoes, and also Three Houses, cementing it as one of Nintendo's premier RPGs. Also, like with Xenoblade, I don't like the art style of the new games, but again, that's just a nitpick. Nintendo is staying with this with the new one that was just announced for the Switch too. But what makes Fire Emblem special is its blend of strategy and storytelling. The tactical combat is deep and rewarding, but it's the characters that keep fans invested. Permadeath makes every decision carry weight, and the relationships you build gives the battle an emotional edge. At the same time, more recent games have made the series more accessible, expanding its audience without losing its identity. Like, gonna be honest, I played Awakening on the easier mode without permadeath. Like, I think I would have lost my mind playing with that, but if you're looking for a challenge, it could definitely be for you. So why does Fire Emblem land outside of the top 10? It's actually higher than it would have been a few years ago because it's finally achieved a lot of mainstream success, but it is also still fairly niche. It doesn't have the same appeal as something like Kirby or Zelda. Also, the top 10 in here, I also really love. Like, I just can't find anywhere to put Fire Emblem higher for me personally. If you think Fire Emblem is higher, I totally understand that, but again, I'm just factoring in my personal opinion as well. I just don't think I can put it higher than any of these 10 series for me. Sliding into the 10th spot is Pikmin, one of Nintendo's most creative and experimental franchises. Shigeru Miyamoto famously created the series after the Super Mario 128 tech demo. Released on the GameCube in 2001, the original Pikmin introduced players to Captain Olimar, a tiny astronaut stranded on a strange planet, and the colorful plant-like creatures who help him survive. The concept was bold, part real-time strategy, part puzzle game, and unlike anything Nintendo has ever made before. What made Pikmin stand out was its charm and its tension. These adorable little creatures would loyally follow Olimar's orders, whether it was carrying treasure, building bridges, or fighting massive alien beasts, but they weren't invincible. One wrong move and dozens could perish in a single attack. The mix of cuteness and tragedy gave the series a surprisingly emotional weight, far cry from the carefree tone of most Nintendo franchises. Each entry is built in that formula. Pikmin 2 expanded the roster of Pikmin and added caves that pushed your strategy skills further. Pikmin 3 introduced multiple captains and stunning visuals that made the alien environments feel more alive. And after a long wait, Pikmin 4 finally arrived on Switch a couple years ago, and that polished the formula to near perfection while giving the franchise the sales numbers it deserved. For years, Pikmin has been a critical darling, but a commercial underdog, with Pikmin 4 becoming the best-selling entry, and of course giving us Ochi. The series felt revitalized, and before anyone brings this up, no, the series is not perfect because Hey Pikmin exists, but that's just a side game, so we're just gonna ignore that. So it sounds like I'm praising Pikmin a lot, so why isn't it higher? Despite its quality, it has always been more of a niche series compared to Nintendo's titans. It is unique, it's consistent in quality, and deeply loved by fans, but it's never commanded the same cultural presence as Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon. There also have only been 4 main series games, and it's not one of those games that can be supported over years because usually after you beat the game, that's it for most people. And that's not a knock on the game either, but it just does mean that it's really only going to be in the spotlight when a new game comes out. And really, any of these top 15, I could see someone moving around in any order depending on their opinion. Number 9, Donkey Kong. Debuting in 1981 as an arcade cabinet that introduced the world to Jumpman, who would later be known as a certain plumber you may know named Mario, that game wasn't just a hit, it was the title that put Nintendo on the map in North America and gave them a foothold in the gaming industry. Without Donkey Kong, there may not have been a Super Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, and countless other franchises. But Donkey Kong didn't stay an arcade villain forever. In the 90s, Rare reinvented the character with Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. Suddenly, he wasn't the bad guy, he was actually the hero. The trilogy that followed was groundbreaking, pushing the SNES to its limits with pre-rendered visuals and unforgettable soundtracks. It wasn't just a visual showcase either. These games had tight platforming, secret pack levels, and co-stars like Diddy and Dixie Kong, who became icons in their own right. For many, Donkey Kong Country is still the gold standard of 2D platforming outside of Mario. The modern era has been more uneven, but not without highlights. DK64 on N64 was ambitious, if flawed, and after a long hiatus, Retro Studios revived the series with DK Country Returns and later Tropical Freeze, a game that many many critics consider it one of the greatest 2D platformers ever made. Tropical Freeze's level design, music, challenges, it's just all masterclass examples of what makes Donkey Kong so enduring. And also its Switch port helped introduce it to a new generation of fans. There also have been a ridiculous amount of spin-offs like DK Jungle Beat, Donkey Konga, DK King of Swing, and so many more. Also yeah, there's not one, not two, but 3 Donkey Kong games that use these bongos for some reason. So why is Donkey Kong number 9? It actually would have been lower 3 months ago, but then Donkey Kong Bonanza came out, which I believe to be one of the best modern 3D platformers. It's just pure fun and is a legitimate system seller for the Switch too. Before that, the DK series hadn't had a new platformer since Tropical Freeze, not counting the remaster, but after the critical and commercial success of it, I can only imagine that Nintendo is going to be doing a lot more for this legendary series. But to get back to why it's not higher, its legacy is massive and its peaks are extraordinary, but the series hasn't been as consistent as the franchises above. There have been long gaps between major entries, and unlike Mario and Zelda, Donkey Kong hasn't defined every console generation. Still, no one can deny its importance, and Donkey Kong is both Nintendo's origin story and still 40 plus years later a part of their identity. Now, if you don't really like platformers, I don't think you'll have Donkey Kong this high. Personally, platformers are one of my favorite genres. I think when you mix in the quality of the main series games, the legacy, and the support, if you want to also count the spin-offs, there's just a lot to love in this series, which in my opinion makes Donkey Kong deserving of being at number 9. Coming in at number 8 is one of Nintendo's most deceptively powerful franchises, Animal Crossing. And while a lot of people may be mad at me for putting this high, because on the surface it looks simple, move into a village, meet your neighbors, decorate a house, and maybe do some fishing. But since its debut on the N64 disc drive in Japan, and later on the GameCube in the West, Animal Crossing has quietly grown into one of Nintendo's biggest cultural juggernauts, and even has LEGO sets now. What sets Animal Crossing apart is its real-time design. The world moves along with you day by day, season by season, holidays are celebrated, shops open and close on schedules, and your villagers live their little lives whether you're there or not. That sense of immersion makes the game feel alive in a way few others do. Wild World on the DS took that magic portable, Relief on the 3DS expanded customization and gave you mayoral control, and New Horizons on Switch became nothing short of a phenomenon, even if some people like myself still prefer New Leaf. But still, New Horizons gave tens of millions of people a cozy, creative escape when they needed it most in 2020. It's now one of the best-selling Switch games of all time as well. The series' strengths are obvious. It's endlessly relaxing, deeply personal, and surprisingly emotional. Villagers became friends, your town became a reflection of yourself, and logging each day feels like checking in on a second life. You could really play this game for years, but Animal Crossing isn't without its drawbacks. Its slow pace can be frustrating to players who want constant progress, and some entries, including New Horizons, have been criticized for being too streamlined or missing features fans expected. Now, there have been a couple spin-offs. There was Happy Home Designer, which I personally loved, and Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, which, despite its flaws, I did have fun with. And while most franchises in the top half of this video have more games, Animal Crossing has done enough to justify this placement with how consistently great the games are and how much of a cultural staple it's become. These are also games you can play for a very long time, so they can stay relevant for a while with updates. If you watch my top 10 3DS games video, you probably aren't surprised Animal Crossing is this high. At 7, we have a series that's as influential as it is inconsistent, Metroid. First released in ¡86, Metroid introduced players to a sprawling alien world, full of hidden secrets and upgrades that gradually expanded your abilities. Its atmosphere was moody, isolating, and intimidating, a stark contrast to the cheery tones of Mario. And at the end of it all, Nintendo shocked the gaming world by revealing that the armored bounty hunter Samus was a woman, one of gaming's first female protagonists. Metroid hit its stride with Super Metroid in '94, a masterpiece of design that remains one of the most studied and respected games of all time. Then in the 2000s, the series reinvented itself with Metroid Prime on the GameCube. Against all odds, the franchise transitioned flawlessly into 3D, creating an atmospheric first-person adventure that balanced exploration, combat, and discovery better than almost any other game. Prime remains one of Nintendo's crown jewels and widely considered to be one of the best games of all time. But Metroid has always struggled with momentum. Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission on the GBA were excellent, but then came long droughts between releases. The DS's Metroid Prime Hunters was interesting, but also divisive. Other M on Wii alienated fans with clunky gameplay and a controversial story. For a time, it seemed like Metroid was doomed to stay in the shadows, and that changed with Samus Returns on 3DS, which was a remake of Metroid 2. And then we also got Metroid Dread on the Switch, a return to form game that proved Samus still had plenty left to offer. And with Metroid Prime 4 finally on the horizon, the future looks brighter than it has in decades. And yes, I didn't mention Metroid Federation Force just because if you remember that time, Metroid fans were losing it because they thought that was going to be the end of the series. But why does Metroid sit at number 7? Because when it's good, it's great, and has some of the best games ever made like Metroid Prime and Super Metroid. Metroid, it literally helped define an entire genre of Metroidvania games, most notably now with the Hollow Knight games, but its inconsistent release history and occasional stumbles keep it from rising higher. Metroid is one of Nintendo's most respected series, but it's never reached the same mainstream appeal as the giants above. The next 6 are all the big guns that have changed gaming as well, and it's just hard for me to find a higher spot for Metroid. I think the highest I could put it would maybe be like 1 spot higher, but if you're a big fan of Metroidvanias, this could definitely be like a top 4 from Nintendo franchise. Number 6, Kirby. Might surprise some people to see Kirby cracking the top 6, but when you really look at his body of work, it makes sense. Kirby's story began in 1992 with Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy. Designed by the legendary Masahiro Sakurai, Kirby was meant to be a placeholder character during development, just a cute blob that would eventually be replaced with something final. Players loved him so much that Nintendo decided to keep him, and that happy accident led to one of their most versatile series. What makes Kirby unique is his ability to constantly reinvent himself, like quite literally. The inhale and copy mechanic means every game is full of experimentation. Kirby's Adventure on the NES was the one that introduced the concept of copying abilities, and that just gave so much variety to what Kirby could do. On the SNES, Kirby Superstar gave us a whole anthology of games in one, many of which still influence Kirby titles today. This is also widely considered to be one of the best 2D platformers of all time. The series never stopped experimenting. Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, let you combine powers into new forms. Kirby's Epic Yarn transformed him to the Thread and was the first Kirby game I played back in the day. Canvas Curse used the DS stylus for completely new mechanics. Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, besides having a beautiful art style, was one of my favorite Wii U games, just one of the most creative games I've played. Recently, Kirby and the Forgotten Land finally brought the series into 3D, seamlessly adapting Kirby's identity into a new dimension, and the result was one of the most acclaimed and best-selling Kirby games ever. I also gotta talk about Air Ride. This racing game on the GameCube is a fan favorite, and fans have been begging for it to come back for years, and their wishes were finally answered with the announcement of Kirby Air Riders, coming this year, also with $50 amiibo. But anyway, of course Kirby games have their criticisms, many are considered too easy, and some feel more like smaller experiments than massive system-defining titles, but that's part of Kirby's role within Nintendo. He's the franchise where designers try wild ideas, test mechanics, and explore new aesthetics. The series' consistency, creativity, and sheer charm have carried it for more than 30 years. That's why Kirby lands in the top 5, not because every entry is groundbreaking, but because no matter what form he takes, Kirby almost always delivers. Also, Kirby is apparently the most powerful Nintendo character ever, since he was the only one to initially survive in Smash Ultimate's campaign, so I gotta give him some credit for that. Now, I think something like Metroid has much higher highs than Kirby, but I think when you look at the series as a whole, Kirby has just done more. But this was one of the toughest choices for me. Like, I didn't know what I was gonna have at 6 or 7, and if I ever remake this video, I could definitely see it switching. At number 5, we've got one of the most universally beloved Nintendo franchises ever created, Mario Kart. From its humble beginnings on the Super Nintendo in '92 to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe dominating the Switch, and most recently Mario Kart World on the Switch too, Mario Kart has been the go-to party game for generations. It's one of those rare series where everyone from hardcore gamers to people who almost never touch a controller know exactly what to do. Just drive fast, dodge shells, and pray you don't get hit by a blue shell right before the finish line, and also get some good RNG. Every entry is built on that simple formula while keeping it fresh. 64 brought the series into 3D, Double Dash on the GameCube experimented with 2 riders per cart, creating chaos in the best way. The DS entry introduced online play and was my introduction to the series. Mario Kart Wii became one of the best-selling games of all time, and Mario Kart 8, especially with its deluxe version on the Switch, perfected the formula with stunning visuals, tight controls, and a ridiculous amount of content if you include the DLC. Even with Mario Kart World out on Switch, I still think 8 Deluxe is a better game. World has a great concept being, of course, an open world and being the biggest Mario Kart, but it just has a lot of issues with a lot more luck and a lot less skill than previous games, and not having much to do in the big open world. I still think it's a good game and will get better though, so I don't want to make it seem like this game is just awful and irredeemable. But here's why Mario Kart isn't higher. For all its polish and consistency, it doesn't have the range of other Nintendo franchises. It's always great fun, but it's essentially one note, just kart racing with items. It's no storytelling, no major reinvention, just refinement of what's already there. That's not a flaw exactly. In fact, its consistency is maybe its biggest strength, but it keeps it from reaching the heights and variety of Nintendo's top 4 in my opinion. It's defined multiplayer games for decades, and it's arguably the most accessible franchise Nintendo has ever made. Now, why is it this high even though I think that a lot of other games have higher peaks and more variety? It's just because if you remember, one of the factors is legacy and popularity. Like, some of the Mario Kart games are some of the best-selling games of all time. Pretty often it actually sells better than the main series, and it's just really hard to ignore that. Number 4, Super Smash Bros. Few franchises have ever delivered on a concept as perfectly as Super Smash Bros. When Masahiro Sakurai pitched the idea of Nintendo characters fighting each other, it sounded absurd, but when the original launched on the N64 in 1999, players were instantly hooked. It wasn't just a fighting game, but it was a celebration of Nintendo itself. What makes Smash so brilliant is its accessibility, like so many other Nintendo franchises. Traditional fighting games can be intimidating with their complex combos and steep learning curves, and don't get me wrong, Smash still does take a lot of skill skill and has its own steep learning curve, but by contrast, it's built around simplicity: one button for attacks, one for specials, a jump, grab, and shield, and anyone can pick it up and have fun. But underneath that simplicity lies incredible depth. Movement options, advanced techniques, and character matchups have made Smash one of the most enduring competitive games in the world. The series grew explosively with each entry. Melee on the GameCube turned it into a competitive phenomenon still played in tournaments 20 plus years later. Brawl added cinematic flair with the Subspace Emissary story mode and third-party characters like Sonic and Snake, proving the franchise could go beyond Nintendo. Yeah, I know it sucks for competitive play, but this was what got me into the series. Smash for Wii U and 3DS refined the formula, and is the reason I spent who knows how much money on Amiibo, and then came Ultimate, culmination of everything Smash had been building towards. I guess you could say it's the ultimate Smash game. With Everyone Is Here, and almost 90 characters counting the DLC, countless stages, and fighters from across gaming history, Ultimate became more than just a game, but it became a living museum and a love letter to video games as a whole, and in my opinion, it's the best fighting game of all time. Now, Smash isn't perfect. Balancing such a massive roster is kind of impossible, and the online play hasn't been perfect. I mean, we still don't know exactly how Elite Smash works, but those flaws don't change its place in history. Even with just 5 games, or 6 if you want to count the 3DS as a separate one, these games last entire generations and beyond. I also am incredibly biased since I used to be somewhat of a competitive Smash player back in the Wii U era and the beginning of Ultimate, but it's just so hard to find a Nintendo franchise that has more consistent quality and more of a lasting legacy than Smash. Number 3, The Legend of Zelda. Few franchises carry the prestige of Zelda, and from the moment the original game launched on the NES in '86, Zelda has been about exploration, discovery, and wonder. You weren't guided by waypoints or tutorials. You were dropped into Hyrule with a sword, and it was up to you to figure things out. That sense of freedom became the core of the series' identity. Over time, Zelda redefined itself again and again. A Link to the Past perfected the 2D formula with intricate dungeons and tight design. Then came Ocarina of Time in '98, a game so influential it changed the entire industry. It introduced Z-targeting, cinematic cutscenes, expansive 3D worlds, in a way that set the template for every action-adventure game that followed. Many still consider it to be the greatest game of all time all these years later. But Zelda didn't stop there. Majora's Mask dared to be experimental, focusing on time loops and darker themes. Wind Waker took a huge stylistic risk with cel-shaded visuals, and though divisive at first, it's now beloved. Twilight Princess delivered darker realism, Skyward Sword leaned into the beginning of the timeline, there's been countless great 2D games, and then Breath of the Wild shattered expectations by reinventing open world design. Its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, doubled down on creativity with its building mechanics, proving Zelda isn't afraid to evolve even decades into its lifespan. Zelda, of course, is not flawless. Some games like Skyward Sword struggled with pacing or divisive mechanics, and it's not as omnipresent as Mario or Pokemon, but what sets Zelda apart is how consistently great it is. It doesn't release as often, but when it does, the gaming world pays attention. Its critical acclaim is nearly unmatched, and it has consistently pushed gaming forward. If we're going based on average quality of each game, Zelda would probably be number 1 on the list. Personally, it's my second favorite Nintendo series, but I just can't put it above the next 2 when I factor in the other criteria. Number 2, Pokemon. There's no denying it, Pokemon is bigger than video games. Since its debut in '96, it's become one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time, spanning not only games, but trading cards, anime, movies, toys, and cultural phenomenon like Pokemon Go. But at its heart, Pokemon has always been about one thing: the journey of catching creatures, training them, and forming bonds. The mainline games have followed a simple but effective formula: travel through a region, battle gym leaders, take down a villainous team, and become the champion. Yet each generation has added something new. Gold and Silver introduced day-night cycles and a full second region. Ruby and Sapphire brought in double battles and secret bases. Black and White pushed storytelling in bold new ways, while X and Y modernized the series with full 3D. And with Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, the franchise finally stepped into a more open world design. And of course, there have been tons of spin-offs where I could actually have them as their own franchises on this list if that's how I formatted it. Fighting games like Pokemon Coliseum, Pokemon Stadium, Pokemon Tournament, the aforementioned Pokemon Go, Pokemon Snap, and now Pokemon Minecraft Stardew Valley coming soon. Pokemon's impact on childhoods cannot be overstated. Trading and battling through link cables on the playground created entire communities. The anime made Ash and Pokemon global icons, and the trading card game remains a cultural and financial juggernaut. Few franchises have such cross-generational appeal. Parents who grew up with Red and Blue now share generations with their kids, but Pokemon isn't without criticism like all the other franchises here. Many fans feel recent games have been rushed with technical issues and missing features. Some generations are beloved classics, other feels like they didn't live up to the series' potential. Yet despite those flaws, Pokemon continues to dominate. Even at its weakest, it sells tens of millions of copies and sparks cultural moments. Pokemon earns the number 2 spot because it's not just a game series, but a global phenomenon. Its cultural footprint is bigger than almost anything else in Nintendo's library. And I'm gonna be honest honest when I say this, I'm not the biggest Pokemon fan. I loved Omega Ruby and have played a number of the spin-offs, but I've just never became a big fan of either the game series, the trading cards, or anime. But I just can't put it lower than 2 on this list, even with all my biases, because of just how massive this series is. And finally, at number 1, who else could it be but Mario? The plumber isn't just Nintendo's mascot, but the face of video games. Super Mario Bros. In 1985 launched the hit series and revived the gaming industry after the crash of '83, and that one game alone laid the foundation for modern platforming and showed what video games can be. From there, Mario Bros. 3 perfected 2D design with more power-ups and more varied levels. Mario World gave us Yoshi and a sprawling interconnected map. Then came Mario 64, which didn't just bring Mario into 3D, but defined how 3D games should work. Its influence is everywhere. Mario Galaxy delivered breathtaking gravity-defying levels, while Mario Odyssey proved Mario could thrive in more massive sandbox worlds. Nearly every mainline Mario game isn't just good, but it's very often revolutionary. But Mario doesn't stop at platformers. He dominates every genre he touches. Even if I don't include Mario Kart, there's entire subseries with sports with tennis and golf, RPGs with Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi, Mario Party. He even teaches typing and goes through hotels. Like, Mario does it all quite literally. It's maybe like 2 genres Mario hasn't had a game in. Now, if I wanted to get really specific, there could probably be like 60 franchises on this list, with half them being different Mario spin-offs. And at the time of writing, I'm actually also working on a video ranking all the different Mario series. If you want to check that out, I'm sure it's probably out by now. But anyway, and beyond the games, Mario is just a cultural icon. He's the most recognizable character in gaming and one of the most recognizable fictional characters in the world, and his recent movie proved his popularity isn't slowing down. Mario takes the top spot because no other franchise has been this consistently excellent, this adaptable, and this influential for over 40 years now. Mario isn't just Nintendo's #1 franchise, but in my opinion, easily gaming's #1 franchise. And that's the list. I know this was a really long video. I know you probably disagreed with some things I said. I know people are probably nitpicking some of my choices. And like I said, this video is very tough to make because I would try to balance my personal opinions as well as other factors. And it's going to be impossible to make everyone happy. I know there's probably some people angry at this list. With over 30 franchises, I hope you can understand that everyone's list is going to be different. I don't think my list is the definitive list. It's just, in my opinion, I think this is what it is. If you want to make your own list with different criteria, that's totally fine. I just thought the criteria I used for this works for me because I want to give my personal opinions on these franchises without making it the sole factor for this. Because if that was the case, Pokemon would be a lot lower. But if we're actually looking at this being the ultimate Nintendo ranking, I don't think it's fair to put Pokemon lower. But I would love to hear your opinions in a respectful way, like why you may have agreed or disagreed with some of these choices. And if you made it to the end of this video, I'd really appreciate if you'd like and subscribe, as I make a lot of content like this. So if you enjoyed this, I think you'll enjoy a lot of my other content. Also, consider joining my Discord and becoming a channel member for just a couple bucks a month. Thank you for watching Domainy, and I'll see you next time.